Hello, cruel world. My name is Dr. 𝐂𝐿𝐴𝐍. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous 𝐂𝐿𝐴𝐍. Now, Madeleine McCann is probably one of the most famous 3-year-olds of all time, fortunately for all the wrong reasons. As the whole world knows, a few days shy of her 4th birthday, she vanished from her bedroom whilst her family visited Praia de Luz in Portugal in May 2007. So in this video, we're going to talk about recent developments, including that there's another suspect, Christian Bruckner, who was incarcerated recently. But more importantly, I'm going to tell you my thoughts, although to be honest, with a high degree of speculation, on what actually happened. But the focus of this will be about my analysis of the parents' actions and the vitriol, the hatred they received from members of the public. And finally, their perceived lack of grief and stoicism, what I think about that. So sit back, relax, and welcome to A Psych for Sore Minds. Okay, so what happened? Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. We all know that in Portugal in May 2007, Madeleine's parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, who are both doctors, were having dinner with some friends at nearby their rented apartment. Madeleine and her 2 younger twin siblings were asleep. The McCanns and their friends took turns to go back to their apartments to check in on their kids. And when it was the mother's turn, Kate, Madeleine was gone and she has never been found. The case remains unsolved to this day, despite new developments, which I will mention later. Celebrities like David Beckham, J.K. Rowling have been involved, and they've all urged the Portuguese and the British authorities to find the girl. The McCanns immediately set up a website and asked for donations. They've appeared on TV, in newspapers, reporters have hounded them, and then Madeleine's disappearance took a sensational turn when Portuguese authorities threw suspicion towards the McCann, who were investigated, though they were never charged. What I think is a really interesting and almost unique but disastrous aspect to this case is the public vitriol, the hatred that the parents have received. There was a lot of sort of Twitter comments which started to gain traction in 2007. And they were definitely the target of trolls. If you're interested in this kind of thing, I've done another video about the real life horrific case of a young girl called Hannah Smith, who's 14, who committed suicide because she was relentlessly bullied by internet trolls. I've looked at the psychology behind internet trolling. Go check out that video. I'll put the description in the links. So back to Kate and Jerry, people were hurling abuse towards them and they were chasing them online despite the fact that neither of them had a social media presence. I've got some opinions about that, which I will come to later. And as I said, another aspect that was criticised was McCann's, especially Jerry's, stoicism. So the fact they didn't seem that agitated. And some people assumed this meant that they were guilty, and some people still think that. And again, I will talk about my opinions on that later. The McCanns actually testified during the Leveson Inquiry. So if you're English, you probably have heard of this. This is when there was a big inquiry several years ago about the actions of the media who had bugged lots of celebrities' phones just so the tabloids could get all these news stories. And during this inquiry, it was discovered that tabloid editors became obsessed with both of the McCanns, especially Kate. And personally, I think this is a really nasty and cynical way of reporting news. They're basically preying off the anguish of the family. So in my opinion, it's a fine line between informing the public, which the press are allowed to do, or obliged to do, but they seem to have this perverse pleasure in watching and criticising Kate in her distress. The McCanns established the Madeleine Fund, and that saw donations from celebrities like J.K. Rowling, Richard Branson. Simon Cowell even dug deep into his pockets, although his trousers are quite high, so maybe it's quite easy for him. Through their involvement with the fund, the McCanns made friends with certain UK personalities, and they became, I wouldn't say they became famous or celebrities themselves, but they certainly became quite well known. Kate McCann was actually invited to attend the show Dancing on Ice as a participant, and she declined, saying that the online trolls would latch on to more hatred if they saw the family having fun in any way. I think that's tragic, and again, I will tell you my opinions later on in this episode. Before we get into that, let's go do a bit of background on the McCanns. So the McCanns met in 1993 in Glasgow, which is in Scotland, as you know. They both studied medicine. Kate studied it at the University of Dundee. Jerry studied medicine at the University of Glasgow. By the way, I studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh. So I think that's what they call a full house, or if you're Scottish, it's what you call a full house, you English bastards. Shout out to my Scottish viewers. The McCanns married in 1998 and they had their first child, Madeleine, in 2003, and then they had their twins in 2005. Jerry focused on cardiology whilst Kate worked as a general practitioner. Jerry remains a doctor to this day. He's a cardiovascular consultant at the University of Leicester Hospital. Kate left medicine, but she works for children's charities. Both of the McCanns are devoted Catholics, and apparently the disappearance of Madeleine strengthened their faith. The McCanns also currently travel around the world to raise awareness, both specifically about Madeleine's case and also other cases of disappearance of other children. Okay, briefly I'm going to tell you about new developments and then we'll discuss and dissect the parents' behaviour in detail. So you might know this, but there's a suspect called Christian Bruckner, and he's a 45-year-old, and he is now been made an official suspect in connection with Madeleine McCann's disappearance. This all happened last month, or a month before I recorded this, which would have been April 2022. Bruckner is a real piece of work, by which I mean a piece of shit. He's a convicted paedophile and a rapist, currently serving a 7-year prison sentence for the sexual assault of a 72-year-old woman. And one of the reasons that the police were interested in him, apart from the fact that he was in the area geographically, was that he had his jaw reset and these these 4 rabbit teeth straightened during procedure at a private dental clinic in his native home of Germany, according to a TV investigation. And this was described as a face-changing operation, and this happened shortly after Madeleine's disappearance. So in theory, it seems like he was changing his appearance to try and escape detection. Is that the case? Is he guilty? I don't know, but we shall find out soon, I imagine. Okay, let's go back a bit. Let's look deeper into the actions of that fateful evening, what Jerry and Kate McCann did. So as I said before, they were having dinner. We know they were having dinner with 7 other people, many of whom were doctors that they knew as medical students. This was on the 3rd of May 2007. Their 3 kids were asleep in their apartment, which is about 50 meters away from the tapas restaurant that they were in. They actually said that they'd done something similar earlier on in the trip. So what happened is they left the apartment door slightly ajar, and around 9 p.m. that evening, Jerry McCann returned to check on the kids, and they were all there, they were all fine, they were asleep. Then another friend went to check at 9:30 p.m, they were all there, and then when Kate checked on them half an hour later, Madeleine was missing. Okay, right, how am I going to put this into words? I don't want to victim blame, but there's no way around this. There's no other way of looking at this. That was extremely irresponsible behaviour. You know, I've got kids, I've got young kids. They were in a foreign country, right? There's apparently some dodgy men around. I think that cannot be overstated. So during the day, there were other men around the resort asking for money, etc., etc. I mean, that's a huge, huge factor for me. They left the door unlocked, and apparently they sedated some of their kids, including Madeleine, so they'd go to sleep earlier. Even if they're doctors, I think it's just dodgy and dangerous to sedate a kid, because a kid's so small they can react unpredictably to something as strong as sedatives. They need to be monitored at the very least. In fact, no, it shouldn't be done, but if it is being done, then they should be monitored. So I guess what I'm saying is you take all of those things together into consideration, and categorically this is a lapse of very poor judgment. But I really would emphasize that this is not on the background of a pattern of regular neglect from the McCanns or, abusive parenting. As far as we know, there's no reason to think that they were abusive, that social services weren't involved, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to say is that in that context, I think it's really unfair that they've received so much hatred and vitriol. So from my experience of working as a forensic psychiatrist, I've assessed hundreds of perpetrators of violence that have mental disorders and things that parents have done with their kids, either the perpetrators themselves talking about their own childhood or even the perpetrators looking at their own kids. So much worse than what the McCanns did, like unfathomable levels of neglect, violence, physical, sexual abuse. I've assessed at least 2 women that I know of who actually left their toddlers at their home for hours or for an entire night whilst they've been out clubbing themselves. But what really gets me is that people are so hateful towards them. Maybe not so much now, but there was a time around 2007, almost to the degree that the McCanns committed the murder themselves. And I mean, they were investigated, as I mentioned, but they were cleared. But despite that, some people still seemed suspicious. Personally, I think it was very unlikely that the McCanns were involved, because why would two random people, you know, two doctors, two pillars of the community, just suddenly kill a child out of the blue? As I said before, I've assessed hundreds of violent offenders, and almost always there's previous abuse and there's like an escalation of violence. The only time that that doesn't happen is where somebody suffers a severe mental illness like schizophrenia, hearing voices, etc., which is not relevant to the McCanns. By the way, if you're interested in that, I've got a video telling you about a real life case of mine where a young girl, 18-year-old, in a flash of psychosis, killed her nephew who she was babysitting, who was only a toddler. Tragic case. She was completely psychotic at the time. Her name was Yasmin, or at least that's what I've been calling her in my videos, not her real name. Go and check it out in the 𝐿𝐿 below, in the description below, if you want to know more about that video. I suppose another theory, which is not an unreasonable theory, is that it could have been an accidental death that the parents caused, for example, by giving Madeleine too much sedative and they tried to cover it up. And whereas this is possible, I personally really don't think this is likely, and I'll tell you why. Because how would they have been able to cover it up in such a short period of time? There was, only, maybe an hour, a couple of hours max when they were last seen and when they went out for dinner. So I just think it's unfathomable that they would have the tools, the knowledge, the local knowledge of being able to get rid of the body, because it's never been found, and being able to do all this in such a short period of time. Just logistically, I don't see how it's possible. And then for them to do this, they would have to act like complete psychopaths, both of them, during the dinner to kind of fake whatever had happened. In fact, come to think of it, that's not even possible, because one of their friends had seen Madeleine in the room before she went missing. So unless there's friends in on it, which I think is completely unlikely, then I just don't see how it can happen. I don't buy it. I don't buy it as a theory. So if we accept that they're investigated, and if we accept that the McCanns are innocent, which is completely uncategorically what I think, then it's completely unfair that people are still hating on them for that lapse of judgment. I mean, they've already paid the ultimate price, and I think it's cruel. I think it's unnecessary to add to their burden. To me, this is an analogy. That's like us seeing a victim of a horrific car crash who's just like, just their car's just rolled over, they've got broken bones, they're bleeding and they need help. And that's like the public going up to them and chastising them for speeding and slapping them. Yeah, of course they shouldn't have been speeding, but that is not the issue right now. That's a given. So there was lots of media attention, there was lots of trolls, and one specific criticism was that the level of attention that Madeleine McCann got. And some people said in various newspaper articles, etc., that she only got so much attention and the case has only been kept alive in the public consciousness for so long because she's white, she's rich, she's privileged, both her parents are doctors. And for example, it got more attention than other specific cases that happened around that time or since then to young black girls who have disappeared. And look, that's true, that's probably true. I don't disagree with that. I think on a societal level that shows a massive inequality and unfairness, but I don't think we should be victim blaming. It's not the fault of the McCanns that the world is like that. They're just doing their best for their daughter. So it's okay to have those views, but it's not okay to take it out on the McCanns, in my opinion. Something else that made me reflect was what I said earlier about Kate McCann turning down Dancing on Ice. So as I said, she declined because online trolls would latch on to any moment of fun for the family. And in my opinion, I know this is only a minor thing, but it really kind of, for some reason, resonated with me. It really made me feel really sad because researching this episode, I saw some comments on YouTube videos that was basically connected to that, saying that the McCanns, but especially Kate, are always just want fame and a clout seeking. And I think that's completely unfair. I think it's untrue as well. Something horrific happened to them and they ended up with some celebrity attention. It wasn't intentional. And in my opinion, all the attention they garnered or they tried to get was to help raise awareness and increase the chances of Madeleine eventually being found. The reason I think that is because neither Kate nor Jerry have ever had a social media presence. They never tried to be celebrities. They were never trying to milk it. So if Kate had wanted to go on that show, Dancing on Ice, and I don't know whether she did, maybe she didn't, but if she did, I think it'd be very tragic that she couldn't because of what other people would say and think about her. Just because something horrific happened to somebody, even if they're in grief, it doesn't mean they can't have any fun in the future. So to me, another analogy would be like, if you've got a victim of some sort of sexual abuse, are these people saying that they're never allowed to enjoy themselves in public? And as I said, it's different if they were using the experience or using the tragedy of their child to gain attention. That would be very cynical, it would be very distasteful. So basically what I'm saying is if they used Madeleine's disappearance or death to become famous, but that's not what they're doing. They've used it to spread awareness, and that's very different. What do you think as Psych for Sore Guys? Do you think what I'm saying is fair? Do you think if, theoretically speaking, she wanted to do dancing on ice, she should be allowed to? Do you think that would be in poor taste? Let me know in the 𝐿𝐿𝐿 section below. Something else that I just wanted to mention before I finish that can't be overlooked is the labelling of the McCanns. They have to now carry this burden with them for the rest of their lives. They're just so recognisable. I'm sure people must look at them, at the very least, probably comment at them on the streets every single day of their lives. So we know that Jerry is working as a cardiologist. Every single member of staff in that hospital must know who he is and what happened to him. And probably most patients would recognise him as well because he's been in the paper so much. I think they cannot escape constant reminders of the tragedy. So we don't need to add to their anguish by slagging them off in the media. So to conclude, they made a stupid mistake. It was a critical mistake and something I'm sure they'll regret till the day they die. But that doesn't mean they should be chastised publicly for eternity, in my humble opinion. That's enough from me. What do you think of Psych for Sore Guys and Gals? What do you think actually happened in the disappearance of Madeleine? And another important aspect that I just want to address before I finish, apologies I forgot, was the fact that Jerry didn't show enough emotion apparently. So because he was so stoic, this indicated that they were guilty. What are my thoughts on that? I'll tell you in a sec, but first I'd just like to introduce you to this channel. This is Psych for Sore Minds. My name is Dr. 𝐂𝐿𝐿𝐿 Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders in courts and prisons and psychiatric units. I give evidence as an expert witness in criminal trials. This channel, the Psych for Sore Mind, is a smorgasbord of topics. If you like your true crime with a sprinkle of psychiatry, you gotta go chickadee, check out my videos. I interview people that have had issues with mental health problems. I look at celebrities, high profile cases. I look at really gruesome, lower profile cases. There's something for everybody on this channel. I implore you to subscribe. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it actually increases your IQ by about 7 or 8 points. So back to what I was saying before. I don't think it's fair to judge how somebody's grieving because histrionics and hysterics aren't the only way to grieve. I'll give you another analogy. You probably have heard of the case of Meredith 𝐂𝐿𝐿𝐿 on the 1st of November 2007. She was a British exchange student from the University of Leeds and she was murdered at the age of 21 in Italy. She was found dead on her bedroom floor. And later, eventually, blood-stained fingerprints were linked to belonging to a man named 𝐂𝐞𝐨𝐧𝐚𝐫𝐿, who has been charged and is currently serving time for the murder, and he is a known violent offender. However, at the time, before he was eventually arrested, 𝐂𝐞𝐨𝐴's American roommate, Amanda Knox, received international publicity, and she was thought to be guilty. And one of the main criticisms she got in the press, in the media, online, was that her reactions didn't seem severe enough or serious enough, so that indicated that she was guilty. So to be specific, while she was arrested in the police station, she was doing some yoga poses. At times she was seen to be smiling and laughing with her boyfriend. The point I'm trying to make is everybody was convinced, not everybody, but a lot of people were convinced that she was guilty because of the way she was acting. But people react to stress in a very different, unpredictable manner. We can't know, we can't predict how ourselves, let alone other people, are going to react. And just because you seem flippant or smiling on the outside doesn't mean that there's inner turmoil. You know, there can still be this tension, but you just don't know. Just because there's tension inside you doesn't mean that you don't act in sort of a silly way sometimes. That's just, so just another thing that's popped into my head is that sometimes when something really bad or awful, you hear about something really bad or awful, or something really embarrassing happens, some people laugh. That's a very natural reaction. I'm sure you've seen that before. They're not laughing because it's funny. They're laughing out of social embarrassment, awkwardness, because they just don't know how to handle the situation. And I think when you look at the McCanns, especially Jerry, his mind must have been reeling at the time. Just all of a sudden, he was having dinner one minute and then his daughter's missing, he's in a foreign country, then shortly afterwards, he's an actual suspect for murder. So I think his life must have flipped, turned upside down, just like the Fresh Prince. So what I'm saying is I think Jerry just froze and he was struggling to process what was going on. So if he wasn't crying, if he didn't look, really, really devastated, doesn't mean he wasn't feeling that inside. Anyway, in conclusion, we've covered the case of Madeleine McCann, specifically her parents' behaviour in detail, what I thought of that, what the public perception has been, recent developments. I've told you about suspect Christian Bruckner. I've shared my thoughts on what I thought happened or didn't happen. I did a deep analysis of the parents' actions, the vitriol from the public, and specifically their perceived lack of grieving and stoicism. So to conclude, I'm just going to say this, my final thoughts. The McCanns made a stupid mistake, a critical mistake that I'm sure they regret bitterly. As a society, I think we need to be a bit more empathetic. Why add to their grief? What is the point? They've already suffered, they're already hurting. I don't think this hatred is for us to teach them a lesson. I think they've definitely learnt the lesson. I think it's for us to project our own issues, our own insecurities, to make us feel better rather than to make them feel worse. I think that's very selfish. Shame on all of us. Shame on you especially. Anyway, that's enough for me waffling. Stay euthymic, watch the rest of my videos, subscribe. I need more people coming to this channel. You need to help me because I'm very insecure and I wasn't hugged enough as a child. Go and check me out at CrimeCon, buy my goddamn book, it's dope. Stay euthymic and do not forget, I love you.